Let's first look at what the agenda for this session is going to be. We're going to start off with, like I said, the very concept, what is legal reasoning? Then we're going to move on to the history of the legal reasoning section. Is this strictly relevant to your learning process? Possibly not, but it does make an interesting story, and I think that every single person who studies legal reasoning should probably have a sense of what is the history of the legal reasoning section. This is, after all, a section that has been in the papers, in the entrance exams, right from the time that very first National Law School entrance exam was conducted. So we're going to look at the history of the legal reasoning section. We're going to try and move on to probably the most critical part of the agenda, understanding the reasoning process. What is legal reasoning? How do you do legal reasoning? Then we're going to move on to distilling some principles. Are there some rough guidelines, these principles that you can follow every time you confront a legal reasoning problem? So the moment you understand the process, the next step is to try to create a structure for the kind of thinking that is required. If the process requires you to do A, B, C, are there any general principles that govern how you should do A, B, C? So we'll move on to framing these principles. And if you remember them, if you remember these principles throughout, that's going to really serve you well in applying the legal reasoning process properly. We're going to finally, after that, we're going to look at some problems from past years. So important to contextualize what you're learning in terms of what's actually been coming in the past year's papers. So we're going to look at some of these past year's problems. We're then going to move on to trying to solve a few independent new problems by applying those very principles that we distilled in the beginning. So once we've understood the process and we've got these principles, how do you really apply them? We're going to try and look at a fresh set of problems and try and apply these principles to those problems. You're going to take a shot at answering those problems, and I'm going to sit back and enjoy myself. Then we're going to look at something that became really important 2 years back, the double principle problem, or the multiple principle problem, more accurate, the double principle problem. I think the best way to understand it is that it was a kind of complication, a complexity over and above what had been witnessed in previous years' entrance exams. So I think it's important to see that category of multiple principle problems. And don't worry about the terminology, it will become clear to you as and when we start studying the subject. Again, look at some problems from past years which are double principle problems to understand what has really been happening. Then a test problem set to look at some fresh problems from multiple principle problem types. And finally finish with a big picture, a sense of capturing everything, distilling whatever we've learned, and really coming to creating a few pithy principles, a few pithy guidelines to move forward in a more structured way, so that when you do the next session, you are already armed with a very strong conceptual understanding, and you know how to apply that understanding to any different problem type. So I think that would serve to lay a good foundation on which you can build. I feel that's extremely important, and my years of experience have convinced me that this session and each of the different components of this session are probably the most important thing in your legal reasoning learning process. So that's how we're going to do it. Let's get started with the first step, which is really understanding what is legal reasoning.